I've had a full life. I was a paper boy for a week. I fathered a child.
There are celebrities who disappear from public life quietly, and then there is Jim Carrey, a man whose absence from Hollywood has felt louder than most people's presence. 4 years, the questions have been building. Where did he go? What really happened behind the scenes of one of the most electric careers in entertainment history? Why did a man who once commanded $20 million per film suddenly seem to vanish from the industry he dominated? The rumors never fully stopped, and neither did the curiosity. But recently, Jim Carrey has been speaking in ways that are more direct and more honest than anything he offered during the height of his fame. And what he has shared paints a picture that is far more complicated, far more painful, and far more human than the rubber-faced comedian the world thought it knew. This is not a story about a star who simply burned out. This is the story of a man who was quietly falling apart long before anyone noticed, and who has finally started telling the truth about what that felt like. To understand where Jim Carrey ended up, you have to understand where he started. Born on January 17, 1962, in Newmarket, Ontario, Canada, Carrey grew up in a household where financial pressure was a constant shadow. His father Percy was a talented saxophone player who gave up his musical ambitions to work as an accountant, trading passion for stability, and finding neither in the long run. His mother Kathleen struggled with chronic illness, spending long stretches confined to her bed, leaving the household to operate under a cloud of anxiety and uncertainty. Jim was the youngest of 4 children, absorbing all of this before he was old enough to fully process it. What he found, early on, was that making people laugh changed the atmosphere in a room. He would stand in front of mirrors for hours, contorting his face, mimicking television personalities, developing an almost preternatural ability to transform himself into someone else entirely. At 10 years old, he wrote a letter to Carol Burnett, telling her he was already skilled at impressions. When she wrote back, he kept that letter. It wasn't just memorabilia. It was evidence, proof that someone real had acknowledged something genuine in him. But life grew significantly darker before it ever got better. In 1975, his father lost his accounting job without warning, and the family's fragile stability collapsed entirely. They could not keep their home. They ended up living in a Volkswagen camper van near Lake Ontario. Jim and his brother slept outside in a tent on cold nights, sometimes waking to frost on their sleeping bags. They washed up at gas stations. There were days when food was not guaranteed. Jim dropped out of school at 16 to work alongside his family, cleaning floors and bathrooms on night shifts just to keep the household from completely falling apart. This is the foundation on which one of Hollywood's most celebrated careers was built. Not privilege, not connections, not an easy childhood that left room for creative exploration. Survival. Pure and grinding survival. Something shifted inside Jim Carrey during those years that comedy could not fully fix. His father Percy, broken by years of failure and helplessness, reached multiple breaking points during that difficult period. There were suicide attempts, more than one. Jim, still a teenager, was present for the emotional aftermath of those moments. Watching the person he admired most collapse under the weight of despair left a mark that never fully healed. He later admitted that from that point forward, he carried a quiet fear that the same kind of darkness existed somewhere inside himself. At the same time, his mother's illness had evolved into dependency on heavy medication, changing her behavior in ways that added confusion and emotional distance to an already strained household. Jim began to withdraw at times, feeling low and disconnected in moments when he was not actively performing for others. He later acknowledged going through periods where he hurt himself, not out of a desire for attention, but because he was searching for something real when everything around him felt numb and distant. None of this was visible to the outside world. The outside world saw a young, wildly energetic comedian who could make anyone laugh. Internally, he had already learned to use humor as armor, not just entertainment, but a method of managing fear, grief, and confusion. Comedy was both his escape and his mask. That combination, the ability to make people laugh while concealing genuine pain, became one of the defining patterns of his entire life. Jim Carrey's first real stand-up performance did not go well. At 15, he walked onto the stage at Yuck Yuck's Comedy Club in Toronto wearing a suit his mother had picked out, convinced he was ready. The crowd did not agree. The jokes fell flat, the energy drained out of the room, and he walked off having learned one of the hardest lessons any performer can face, that wanting it badly is not the same as being ready. He kept going anyway. He performed again and again, learning from failure rather than retreating from it. He set his sights on Saturday Night Live, auditioning multiple times in the early 1980s, and was rejected each time. In at least one instance, he did not even get in front of the show's creator. The doors were simply closed. Rather than accept that verdict, he packed what little he had and moved to Los Angeles, surviving on almost nothing, sleeping on couches in comedy clubs, chasing stage time wherever he could find it. The turning point came when veteran comedian Rodney Dangerfield caught one of his performances at the Comedy Store and recognized something unusual in him. Dangerfield invited him on tour, giving Jim his first real exposure to large audiences across the country. More importantly, that experience pushed Jim to stop relying entirely on impressions of other performers and begin developing his own voice. Physical, unpredictable, completely unrestrained. His body became part of the act in a way that nobody else was doing. That distinctive style, born out of necessity and shaped by years of rejection, was the thing that would eventually change everything. In 1994, Jim Carrey did something that had never quite been done before in Hollywood comedy. He starred in 3 major films: Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber, all released within the same year, all of them successful at the box office. Almost overnight, he became the most commercially reliable comedy star on the planet. For Ace Ventura, he had been paid around $350,000. After its success, that number became almost laughably small compared to what followed. Studios quickly recognized that his name on a poster was worth something extraordinary, and his salary climbed into the tens of millions accordingly. His approach to performance was unlike almost anything the industry had seen. He rarely stuck closely to scripts, improvising large portions of dialogue and reshaping scenes in real time. His characters had an energy that felt genuinely unpredictable, and audiences responded to that quality in massive numbers. But the demands of that level of success were immediate and relentless. He worked constantly, with very little rest. He later spoke about experiencing hallucinations during certain periods of this era, about feeling mentally overwhelmed and disconnected from reality even as his films were breaking box office records. His first marriage, to Melissa Womer, did not survive the transformation that fame brought with it. By 1995, she filed for divorce, citing changes in who he had become. His personal life was quietly fracturing at the exact moment his professional life was reaching its highest point. When Jim Carrey signed on for The Cable Guy and received a salary of $20 million, it was one of the largest paychecks ever handed to a comedy actor up to that point. It also announced to the industry and to the public how much was now expected from him. Every project carried enormous financial weight. Every public appearance required him to perform his own personality on demand. Interviews, press tours, and promotional events meant delivering the same electric energy again and again, regardless of how he actually felt on any given day. On the set of Batman Forever, tensions developed between Carrey and co-star Tommy Lee Jones, whose working styles were reportedly incompatible. It was one of the first public signals that his intensity, which audiences loved on screen, could create genuine friction in professional environments. He was pushing his body through physical comedy that regularly resulted in injuries, often continuing to work through pain rather than pausing to recover. Behind the scenes, he was using medication, Valium among other things, to manage the anxiety and pressure that had become constant companions. His second marriage, to Lauren Holly, was brief and ended under the combined weight of emotional distance, professional pressure, and the increasingly blurred line between who Jim Carrey actually was and the characters he was inhabiting on screen. He had begun adopting a method approach to acting that went further than most performers were willing to go. During the filming of Man on the Moon, in which he played the unconventional comedian Andy Kaufman, he remained in character almost continuously, during meetings, rehearsals, and interactions with cast and crew, to a degree that created genuine confusion and frustration on set. The boundary between his real self and the role had become nearly impossible to locate. The controversies that followed Jim Carrey in his later years were not the kind that came with easy explanations. Legal disputes with studios over royalties and contracts demonstrated that financial success did not automatically translate into control over his own work. The filming of How the Grinch Stole Christmas required him to spend up to 3 hours each day being fitted into heavy prosthetic makeup, with an equally lengthy removal process, all while performing in physically demanding scenes under conditions he described as genuinely difficult to endure. The most serious and personally damaging controversy involved the death of Catriona White in 2015. White, with whom Carrey had been in an intermittent relationship, died of a drug overdose. Her family subsequently filed a lawsuit containing serious allegations regarding his conduct and involvement in her emotional state in the period before her death. Carrey denied the accusations firmly, and his legal team characterized the lawsuit as an opportunistic action targeting his wealth and public profile. The case was ultimately dismissed in 2018. But regardless of the legal outcome, the situation left a lasting mark on how he was perceived, and it contributed significantly to his withdrawal from public life. He began taking fewer roles. Public appearances became rare. The man who had once been impossible to ignore became deliberately difficult to find. When Jim Carrey began speaking more candidly in interviews and public discussions, what he revealed was not the carefully polished narrative of a star reflecting warmly on his career. It was something considerably more raw. He talked openly about depression, not as a past struggle he had overcome, but as something that had run through his life for a very long time. He discussed using medication, including Prozac, for extended periods. He described emotional numbness, the experience of feeling disconnected from his own inner life even during periods of external success. He spoke about the strange and disorienting nature of fame, how it creates a version of you that belongs to everyone else, a public image that takes on a life of its own and gradually becomes harder to reconcile with the private person living inside it. He talked about how the constant demand to perform had made it increasingly difficult to know where the performance ended and where he actually began. He reflected on the difference between feeling genuine pain and pursuing artificial happiness, and expressed the view that sitting with discomfort, rather than escaping it, had ultimately been more honest and more useful.